we've tried to paint the background for Genesis 1. All of that ancient cosmology is the setting of what's going on in Genesis 1. If you don't understand that setting, then you can't make sense of what's going on in Genesis 1. Following me? Yeah. So having set the scene, what we're going to do first, we're going to take a wide-angle shot of Genesis 1. We're going very high. We're going to look at what is happening all across Genesis 1. And then we're going to come back and we're going to look at the first two verses of Genesis 1 and 2, which are a prologue to the text of Genesis 1. Okay? So, what we're trying to do is to discover the original meaning of the text to its author and its audience. Because a text cannot mean today what it never could have meant originally to its audience. So we must therefore enter the world of the original audience. And that's why we began by looking at all that we did in the last class. Now, as we begin wrestling with the text of Genesis 1, I know that we all have a lot of questions about Genesis 1, but I want to begin with a helpful caution from Old Testament scholar Gordon Wenham. Gordon Wenham says, though historical and scientific questions may be uppermost in our minds as we approach the text, it is doubtful whether they were in the writer's mind. And we should therefore be cautious about looking for answers to questions he was not concerned with. Genesis is primarily about God's character and his purposes for sinful mankind. Let us be aware of allowing our interests to divert us from the central thrust of the book so that we miss what the Lord, our Creator and Redeemer, is saying to us. Too often in Genesis, people want to know, did God really create the world in 7 days? And we get into this debate about how old the earth is and all this kind of stuff. Genesis ain't talking about none of that. And because we're so bogged down on that, we miss the message that God is trying to convey. You ever been in a conversation with someone and you're talking past them because they're on another wavelength than you? Or maybe, you're in some kind of an appointment and you sense that they said, we're going to talk. But you realize it's not about talking. They have an agenda. Did that ever happen? And they say, when you said this, you didn't mean that. And I say, no, that's not what I meant. Oh, but you didn't mean this. Like, what? It's not a conversation. Because that person is so intent on trying to get something out of you, they can't hear a word that you've said. This happens in some marriages. All right, I've had the experience. Now, we can do that with the Bible. God's trying to talk to us. And we saying, so God, is 7 days for real? And he's like, I'm trying to tell you something about who I am. And where you've got to start with is what the ancient writer was saying. Get into his head so that you can understand what I'm trying to convey to you. God is trying to reveal himself to us in Genesis 1. Don't miss that. That's what we're after this weekend. You will have some questions that I cannot answer. But remember, the Bible is a window. And we're trying to look through it to see God. Don't get hung up on the window. Is that wood or UPVC? Look through the window to the view. We're trying to see what God is telling us about himself. Are you guys with me? All right, let me try to press gas. So with that caution, we're going to try again into Genesis 1 and discover its original meaning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So when it says in the beginning, what we're being told about is the pre-creation state. What there was before God created the heavens and the earth. And that pre-creation state, in their way of thinking, refers to chaos. Chaos simply means non-order. It refers to the state before order. And this chaos, this non-order, is comprised of three types of problems which prevent order, which prevent human beings from thriving in the world. The first of this is the earth is shapeless and it's empty. The second of these is that there is darkness, and this darkness, thirdly, is over the primeval deep waters. These are three problems that humankind cannot exist within, because if the land is shapeless and empty, we're going to see that refers to a desert, we cannot survive in it. Human beings cannot survive in darkness. Plants can't grow. We can't, raise our kids in darkness. We need light. And we certainly can't live in deep waters. So those are the three problems that we are dealing with, that God is trying to sort out. Now, Genesis 1 is structured in a way to show how this pre-creation chaos is transformed into ordered reality of the chaos, of the cosmos, forgive me. So, creation is a movement from non-order to order. Remember I said that in response to Julius's question? So we're not moving from no thing to something. We're moving from non-order to order. And so the chaos is this dark, watery abyss and a formless, empty earth. And God creates cosmos by creating light to deal with the dark, and then forming and filling what he creates to deal with the formlessness and the emptiness. So the structure of Genesis 1 is on days 1 to 3, God is forming. He forms by separating light from dark, and that's how we get time. Because a day is made up of daytime and nighttime. And that's how we can orient ourselves to a new day. If you don't have time, if you don't have that, people can go crazy. That's one thing with solitary confinement. You don't know what day it is. Never had that experience. That can really mess you up. Okay? The firmament God creates separates the waters, and that creates the heavens. So he creates this hard thing that puts some water above and the rest is below. And then the water below, he gathers it so that the land can emerge, and so we have below the seas and the earth. So these are all the regions that God forms. And then in days 4 to 6, he fills these regions. He takes the sun, the moon, and the stars in the heavens, and these rule time. And then he takes the birds and the fish, he puts the birds by the waters above, and he puts the fish in the waters below. And then he fills the earth with humans and land creatures on the earth. Here's another way of looking at it. This is from Derek Kidner's commentary on Genesis. He says, day 1 deals with God forming light and dark, and on day 4, he fills out that with lights of day and night. Day 2 is sea and skies formed, and day 5 we have creatures of the water in the air. Day 3 is fertile earth, and then on day 6 we have creatures of the land. Or another way to look at it is, we have these problems, darkness, water, abyss, and formless and empty earth, and then God prepares first by days 1 to 3, first he creates day and night by separating light from dark, and then he creates a firmament and separates the waters from above and below, and then he creates the earth by separating from the waters below, and the sea is the waters that remain, and then he creates vegetation. And then he fills all these realms that he's created by creating the sun, moon, and stars to rule day and night, and then the birds and the fish, waters above and below, and land and animals and humans to deal with the formless and empty earth. So, and there are many ways you can look at it, but one of the things that should be occurring to you is that, man, this is a very ordered picture of how God is created. Remember Enuma Elish? And all kind of war and fighting and quarrel and bangarang? That's how things started, remember? And here you have God alone. And he's just ordering. He's just moving things around. And he's doing this by his word. And this tells us he's powerful. He's a God of order. He's a God of structure. He is in control. And he alone is God. And so we're told in Genesis 2:1 that in this way the heavens and the earth were finished and all the hosts of them. So this summarizes all that happens at the end of the first 6 days. So Genesis 1:3 to 131, I think it is, whatever the ending verse in chapter 1 is, all of that is the 6 days of creation. And then we're told that God has finished it all. Now, here's another way to look at it. We start with the land that is wild and unordered. And then not only does God deal with the wild unorderedness on days 1, 2, 3, creates light, creates the sky, creates the dry land. Not only does he fill it, the lights, the creatures above and below in the waters, and the land creatures and humans, but notice there's also division between the land and the skies. And we will see, as we saw in that verse, chapter 2, verse 1, that we're told about the host of the skies and the host of the land. Humans rule below, and the lights rule the heavens or the skies. We're going to talk about that in a while. Any way you look at it, basically creation is divided into a number of realms. And there are two main realms. There's the heavenly realm. We're back to what Marlon was saying. The highest heaven, that's where God lives. But not just God, his divine council, the angels. We're going to talk about that. We have the waters above the skies, and there's water in it. Then we have, this is all heavenly realm. We have the firmament, and in that is the sun, the moon, and the stars. And then below the firmament is the atmosphere. That's another part of the heavens. You remember where when Absalom is killed in a thicket because his hair gets caught in a tree? You guys remember that story? Yeah. It says he's caught between heaven and earth. Okay? Because a part of the heavens is just the atmosphere. So them talk about third heaven. You guys with me? So you have anything above the earth is the first heaven. And then you go further up there, so where you see the birds and thing going on, let's call it second heaven. And you go further above that, above the water, that's the third heaven. That's where God, and there are different ways of doing it. You can talk about seventh heaven if you want. But the point is that you've got heavens going all the way up. Okay. Then we come down to the earth, and on the earth we have land and sea. You have humans down here and animals, and you have fish and sea monsters. Where is Ozzy? This is your Leviathan. All right, we're coming to that. You have water under the earth, water and maybe water creatures, and then you have the underworld where the dead live. This is their conception of the world. And we have looked at this diagram already. I won't spend any more time here. So, part of what we have to understand is that what God is doing in creating all of this is he's making a cosmic temple in which he's going to dwell with man. The earth is good for man to live in, but God is not just trying to build a place where man can dwell. God is also building a place where he will dwell. God originally is going to be dwelling in the heavens, but his intention is not just to be up in the heavens and man be down on the earth. His intention is for heaven and earth to meet. And that's what Eden is. Eden is a place where heaven and earth meet. Because that's why God is walking in the garden in the cool of the day. And his plan is that place that he starts out with on Eden, for it to expand over the entire earth. But surprise, surprise, us humans, we disobey. And we get put out of that garden. And the story of the entire Bible is God trying to get us back into a garden with him. And when we get to Revelation, heaven comes down. Earth doesn't go up. Heaven comes down to earth. Because that's what God does with us, isn't it? God comes down to us. I don't know about you. I have a relationship with God because he keeps meeting me where I am. Sometimes I'm in sin. God meets me there. It's not that I get up to the heavens and I'm doing so awesome and God says, oh, you reach. God is constantly coming down to me. This is the nature of God. But what we're dealing with in creation then is a cosmic temple. Remember the Babylonians, after Marduk, on them killing and them think they build a temple? Well, God is saying, well, nobody built a temple for me. I don't have a temple made by human hands. I built the entire cosmos as my temple. And so after he builds a temple, God enters it. So days 1 to 6 is God making the cosmic temple. When does he enter? Day 7. That's a real climax of the biblical creation story. Sometimes we want to stop at 6. Yeah, man, God make us. We are the pinnacle of everything. The real climax is when God rests. And we're going to talk about that hopefully today. Because when God rests, that's when in that way of thinking in the ancient Near East, when a God rests is when he goes into the sanctuary that's been made for him and put up him foot in the wall and say, yes, business time. Let's run the cosmos. So God has entered the temple. So one way of looking at it is, on day 1, God creates light from dark. Day 2, he creates the skies or heavens. Day 3, he creates the land. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, birds and fish. Day 6, humans and animals. And on day 7, God rests. That means he enters a cosmic temple to dwell with man. Now, we need to talk about how Genesis 1 fits into the structure of the book of Genesis. Genesis 1 to 11 is a block that scholars refer to as a primeval narrative. It's very different, and if you read Genesis 1 to 11, you feel the difference when you get to Genesis 12. Genesis 12, the story slows down at Abraham. It just feels different. But part of what's happening in Genesis 1 to 11, God is communicating to us that first he starts by creating the cosmos, but there is a cycle running through Genesis 1 and 11, and indeed the entire biblical story. We start with creation, and then there's decreation, and then there's recreation. So remember to Norris that there are a number of creations? That's what I'm referring to. So we start with the creation of the cosmos, and mankind is in the garden with God. God is setting it all up. This is his creation. This is where he wants to take us. He wants to extend this thing. He wants life to be like Eden, where you don't have to earn by the sweat of your brow, but the work you do is you're just in flow, as we talk about these days, and it's just sweet. But then what happens? We sin. Cain and Abel ramp up the sin. Well, not Abel, Cain. Then sons of God, no, we got some angels or heavenly beings getting in on action. And God say, reset button, wipe it out and start over. That's the decreation. And then we have Noah as a new humanity. God is starting over with Noah. This is recreation. Surprise, surprise, Noah sins. It gets ramped up at Babel. God scatters. We have more decreation. And then God is starting over with Abraham. That is recreation. And so this is the flow of the book of Genesis. We're moving from creation in Genesis 1 through decreation in the flood, to recreation with Noah, to decreation at Babel, and then to recreation with Abraham. Okay. So we get back to our beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, that's the overview I promised you. What we're going to actually start doing is walking through the first 2 verses, which function really like an introduction to the entire creation account. Now, I want you to think what comes to your mind when you read the heavens. And what comes to your mind when you read the earth. And what comes to your mind when you hear the beginning. Now we tend to think heavens, I was just talking with Marlon Campbell about this earlier. Heaven is a place where after we die, we're going to go as disembodied spirits to be with God on the clouds, and we're going to stroke harps up there, and we're going to look like those little cherubic babies, that we see on greeting cards. That's not in the Bible. That's a mixture of post-Bible Christian tradition and people who sell greeting cards. Or we can think, no man, when God created the heavens, that is a big bang. And from there now, that is all the stars and the galaxies that are expanding, at an incredible rate. But of course, the guys who wrote the Bible had no idea about Big Bang. And they're not thinking about the singularity. They're thinking about something else. And we think the earth is our big blue spherical star rock that's spinning on its orbit and flying around the sun, even whilst our galaxy, I think it's called the Milky Way itself, is flying at who knows how far. I think, yeah, but they have no idea about any of that. That's not what they're talking about. So let's enter their world. First, when they say that in the beginning God created the heavens, that's the Shamayim. That's that first word, heavens, and it refers really to the sky. So it's referring to what is above the earth. Are you guys with me? And then the Eretz is the earth, and that really means the land. Okay? So when God created the heavens and the earth, he created everything in between. Like we say rich and poor. We say uptown and downtown. It's called a merism. It captures everything. So God created everything. That's what it's saying. But specifically, it's telling you about how he created the heavens and the earth. And like we said, created doesn't mean moving from nothing to something. It means moving from non-order to order. So God is ordering, separating, and naming. And this is what he's doing in Genesis 1 to 2. So when he says in the beginning, we can be tempted to think, okay, that is a point in space and time from which all things began. And we're thinking about some kind of Big Bang event. But that's not what they mean. In the beginning, Bereshit is not referring to a point in time like a first-time event. It's referring to an initial period. It's saying this is the beginning of the creation of the heavens and the earth. And what it's saying is that it's describing what God does in those 6 days because God has gotten started. I think that the point is that God is going to be doing more. Okay? And we'll explore that a little bit more in a short while. We could look at it a couple of ways. Some people say when it says in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, it's saying that he started and he made the heavens and the earth. And then what is formless and empty, when it says the earth was formless and empty and darkness over the face of the deep, God created all of that in that chaotic state. And then he moved from there. But I think what it is saying is this is a summary of everything that comes before. I'm sorry, what comes after. And so it is saying that in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then verse 2 tells us how he created the heavens and the earth. It starts with what God started with. And for us, that's a bit difficult because we want to start, like Julia says, with nothing. But that's not how they started. They started, remember all of those creation stories I told you how they start? Water and all kind of thing, and the God orders it. That's where they're starting. Okay? So this is the structure. First there's a prologue, and it begins by, let's call it the heading. This is a story about the beginning where God created the heavens and the earth. And then it starts in verse 2 by describing what God started with. The earth was formless and empty, and waters was over the face of the deep. And then darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. And then it tells us in 6 days how God, out of this pre-created state, makes heavens and earth. All right? And then it tells us in Genesis 2:1, in this way the heavens and the earth were finished. Okay? So God does his creation. And then we're told that God rests on day 7, having finishing creating the heavens and the earth and populating them. So we're told that the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. So as I said, there are 3 problems here. The earth is formless and empty. Darkness is here, and we've got deep waters. And notice the parallelism. Parallelism. That's a Hebrew way of, in one statement, giving you the same thing in different ways so that you think about them and compare them. So darkness is over the face of the deep. Darkness over the face of the deep is parallel to the Spirit of God hovering over the face of the waters. Do you see that? Yeah? And so that means that here we have chaos. The deep waters, where there's darkness, that's chaos. But when God is present over the same waters, then God can begin to bring life and order. And that's our life, by the way. I keep getting ahead of myself. God is the one who makes a difference. So, formless and empty, that word is for formless is tohu, meaning wilderness, wasteland, emptiness. And the other word, empty, is bohu, referring to emptiness or wasteland. And these words together refer to desert, land in which man cannot live. And so if you look at Isaiah 34, this is a passage about God bringing judgment on Edom, one of Israel's neighbors. And quite often in the prophets, what you find them doing is that they talk about a city going back to a state where it's a desert, where it's a haunt of jackals. And the idea there is that it is going into a state of decreation. In other words, God has pulled his hand away. And so, because we have order because God is present. And the moment that, by the way, man, I shouldn't preach. I should. The moment God drops his hand in your life, chaos. Chaos. You need God. This is the point. And so God says, you want to do your own thing? Go on now. And so Edom, he says, their streams will be turned into pitch, her dust into burning sulfur, her land will become blazing pitch, it will not be quenched night or day, its smoke will rise forever, from generation to generation it will lie desolate. It's gone back to desert. None ever pass through it again, and can't live there. The desert owl and screech owl, these are wilderness creatures, will possess it. The great owl and the raven will nest there. That means them take it over. God will stretch out over Edom, the measuring line of chaos, that's that word tohu from Genesis 1, and the plumb line of desolation, bohu. So tohu bohu means desert. Or in Jeremiah 4, Jeremiah is speaking about God bringing judgment. He says, I looked at the earth and it was formless, tohu, and empty, bohu. He said, you know what? It's gone back to decreation. And the heavens and their light was gone. Because remember, God brings light so that we have order. I looked and there were no people. God had created people. Every bird in the sky had flown away. No more birds in the sky. I looked and the fruitful land was a desert. God created vegetation. It's all gone. It's a desert. And its town lay in ruins before the Lord, before his fierce anger. So what we see is a part of God's judgment is a return to a state of decreation. So tohu bohu is referring to desert where we cannot live. And then we have the word tehom for the deep. And this refers to the primeval flood waters. It's the same word that's used when God talks about the flood, that the waters came up from the deep. So what we have in God creating order, moving from chaos to cosmos, is we have the pre-created primordial unordered state where we have desert and darkness and we have deep waters. And God deals with the darkness by creating light, and he separates the waters into waters above and waters below, and gathers the waters below so the earth or land can emerge. So we have darkness and we have deep waters and we have desert. First we get light, then he deals with the waters by separating them, and he also separates the earth, so now we have land. So he's dealt with darkness, he's dealt with the earth, and he's also makes the land fertile so that it produces vegetation and he fills it with living creatures. So the land is not formless and empty, but it is fertile and it's filled with creatures. And then in Genesis 2, we have an account of a lush garden, this is Eden, created out of a dry land and filled with living creatures, including mankind. But what I want you to notice is that even though God deals with the darkness and the desert and the waters, he does not completely remove them. So chaos is desert and darkness and deep waters, but they're contained but not removed in God's cosmos. So God creates light and he calls that day. But he says he separates the light from the darkness, but the darkness he calls night. Are you with me here? So that means that darkness remains. God separates the waters and he separates the waters from the land, but the seas remain. You guys still with me? Yeah. And God creates this lush vegetation, but there is still desert on the land, because when you get to Genesis 2, he's creating man out of the dry land and putting him in the Garden of Eden. So outside of Eden, you still have desert. Are you with me here? And that is only fixed when we get to the end of the story. Because in Revelation 22, we're told that God, it says, John says he saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and only then are we told there was no longer any sea. And only then are we told that there will be no more night, no more darkness. And only then does the garden come back, and all there is the garden and God. Now, we know that the physical world is not structured like this way. You know that, right? I hope so too. But the question we have to ask ourselves is, what does this tell us about the world in which we live? It tells us that God created a good, not a perfect world. He created a bubble that keeps chaos at bay. But it's a dangerous world in which chaos can still break in. Last year, on October 30, I think it was, we had an earthquake like we haven't had in a long time in Jamaica. And then we had a couple aftershocks. And then there was another fairly big jolt sometime in November. I remember I was driving to work when the first one hit. I was fortunate. I work on the 6th floor of a 6-story building. And I was on my way to work when it hit. And I turned around because, I sensed that I needed to attend to some members of my family. Now, I remember after that, I'd be in my office and I'd be wondering, did the ground just shake? I don't know if you've had these thoughts. And then when the second one, I was in that office on the 6th floor. And that was, even though it was less of a jolt, that one was a little bit more scary. Yeah. So I started having this thought a whole lot more. Did the ground just shake? Maybe you guys don't have these thoughts. But one of the things that did for me, it reminded me that the world in which I live is not as under control as I would like to think. Yeah? We love our science. We got medicine. You get sick, you take antibiotics if you can deal with what you have. When hurricane come in, we get warning. You can watch it on our phone. No, man, that now come. But earthquake, we asking all the, what them call themselves, geologists, seismologists. It get come or it get not come. Well, the earth is made up of tectonic plates. And them don't know. And the thing that you're left feeling, when the very ground beneath your feet cannot be trusted, is you ain't in control and nothing. Are you with me? You ain't control nothing. And then you realize, you know what? Lord, begging to make an earthquake come today when we're there on that 6th-story building. And we have a better perception of reality when we're at that place. That's what this represents. It represents their understanding that the world in which they lived was not under their control. That at any moment, chaos could break in. Famine, drought, storm, earthquake, Babylonians coming and invading. And I think they have a better picture of the world than we do. So we know that the world is not organized in this way. But I think we're deceived into thinking that we are in control. Yeah. And what God is trying to tell us through Genesis 1 is, you are in a bubble that I have created. And the moment I drop my hand in your world is chaos. And so if I were you, I would depend on me and not on your internet and your iPhones and your antibiotics and your hurricane predictions and your insurance and your money and your retirement. You guys know what I'm talking about. You're filling in the blanks. Yeah. We try. God alone gives order. And God alone holds chaos at bay. But the other thing it tells us is that there is work to be done. God wants us to be his co-workers in creating order out of chaos in this world. He wants for us to partner with him. And that's our role. Now, we're told that the Spirit or the wind or the breath of God was hovering over the waters. And I say it that way because that word in Hebrew is ruach, the ruach Elohim. And that same word can mean spirit, it can mean wind, and it can mean breath. And I want you to think of the 4 winds that Marduk is using to deal with the primordial deep, Tiamat, in the Babylonian creation story. But here, God's breath or wind or spirit is not battling with the waters. The image is a nurturing one of a mother bird hovering or fluttering over her brood. And if you look at Isaiah, I didn't put the text there. No, this is actually Deuteronomy 32:11. That same word, ruach, not ruach, the word for hovering, I think it's rahap, appears in an image used to describe the eagle's movement in stirring its young into flight. So it says, in a desert land he found him. Speaking of God bringing the Israelites through the desert into the promised land. In a barren and howling waste, he shielded him and cared for him and guarded him as an apple of his eyes, like an eagle that stirs up its nest and hovers over its young. It's the same word from the Spirit of God hovering over the waters that spreads its wings to catch them and carries them aloft. So God is over by his Spirit, over the waters, nurturing life and order from out of chaos. Yeah, my animation is messed up. So that's ruach, the Hebrew word for hover is rahap, and the text is Deuteronomy 32:10-11. Okay, now, last time I told you that the Bible is a unified story, but it is made up of different parts, written by different writers, different times, different places. And what ties the entire story together are certain threads. And the threads that the biblical writers use to tie the story together are things like repeated patterns, or they will use a repeated motif, or they will use a repeated word. So when you see the same word in 2 places, you're supposed to think of the 2 things and how they connect together. So here's a pattern that's repeated throughout the Bible. God's spirit or wind or breath, is the ruach Elohim, separates or splits waters, and this results in creation, salvation, or new creation. We're back to you, Norris. All right, we're going to talk now about how come you is a new creation? So God's Spirit plus wind and water equals creation. This is the pattern. It starts in Genesis 1. Genesis 1, gone too far. Genesis 1, God, Spirit is over the waters, and that is what starts the whole thing, and we have creation. In Genesis 8, we're told that after the flood, God caused a ruach, a wind, to pass over, and the land and the waters receded. So we have decreation, because what God do, he opened up the windows in the sky and then pulled the plugs from the water below. He drops his hands and water does flood everything. And they go, okay, now it's time to start over. What happens is God uses his breath or the wind to pass over the water. We're back to Genesis 1. You see it? And then the waters recede. So God starts over creation in Genesis 8 in this way. But then in Exodus, we're told that as the Israelites are their backs against the water at the Red Sea, and Moses said, "Oh, I said, what you doing? Put your staff and make we start do something now." And so God divides the sea in two by a strong wind, ruach, which caused the dry land to appear, Genesis 1, anybody? For the people of God to walk through straight out of Egypt. And then when they retell the story in Exodus 15, which is a poetic rendition, it says, by the blast of your nostril, the waters piled up. Okay? So God is blowing, and the water is separated, and Paul tells us they're being baptized in the cloud and in the sea. So we have a new creation. God's people are saved, and they become a new people by God blowing over the waters to create space for them to leave slavery in Egypt. And then in Joshua 3, the Jordan River is split in two by the Ark of the Covenant, and the Ark of the Covenant represents God's presence, that's like God's Spirit, and the Israelites cross into the Promised Land on dry ground. And then in Matthew and Mark and Luke and John, all four gospel accounts, Jesus gets baptized in the Jordan River, heaven opens, and the Spirit of God descends like a dove on him, and then he goes into the desert to be tested. He is starting over the new creation. He's inaugurating the kingdom of God. And then in Acts 2:38, and we love this because we love talk about baptism around here. As believers, we go through water at baptism to receive the Holy Spirit and enter the body of Christ, and new creation happens. 2 Corinthians 5:17. If anyone is in Christ, new creation. So, what can we learn from this comparison between our baptism and the creation of the world? I think this tells us that our lives mirror the physical cosmos that God created. At baptism, we're being recreated like the world after the flood. We're being saved like Israel at the Red Sea. We're entering into the desert for testing. You think you're baptized and it's all done? I lie that. It just begun. You're entering into the desert for testing. But you're also, at the same time, entering the promised land like Israel crossing the Jordan. It's already, but not yet. And our lives are chaos at baptism. And God brings order. He dispels the darkness, and he brings us into light. But chaos is always breaking in. In Kingston, we listened to a sermon this past Sunday from my good friend Ron Wong, and he's talking about putting off the old clothes and putting on the new. And he said something to the effect that, it's like the old clothes is always, the old man is always with you. And I thought that is so true. You see, we need God to not return to chaos, to decreation. And it's only at the consummation of all things that we won't have to deal with chaos in our lives again. One of the things that disturbs us as Christians, sometimes we feel like, Lux, me still a struggle with that? Don't let that surprise you. Of course you can still struggle with that, because that's who you are without God. The question is, how close are you to God? And how much are you depending on him? Sometimes we can get so discouraged and down in the mouth because we're dealing with the same things recurrently. we, I think, are deceived into thinking, based on the progress that we've made, that somehow certain things are not a challenge for us. That's not the picture that God gives us. The picture God is giving us is, things going well for you? It's because I'm here. You move away from me? Chaos. Chaos. Water come down. That is the picture that God is trying to convey to us. And I'm getting all of that from reading Genesis 1 as the beginning of the biblical story. Let's take some questions. Yes, Kayon.
This is more of me trying to process something.
Yes.
Process out loud and see how many thoughts.
Yes.
So, based on what we're saying is that, so when God created the world, there was still darkness,
Yes.
still desert, and
Yes.
there was still sea.
Yes.
So God created the world. It was an imperfect world at the beginning of Genesis 1. I always thought that in the beginning it was perfection.
Yes.
And then it became imperfect when sin entered humanity. But
Yeah.
even I was thinking it's like, when sin entered humanity, sin didn't enter the world because it was already there with the snake. So before it entered humanity, it was there. But anyway, side step. My question is like, so if it starts off imperfect before sin, like why would God do that? I'm not asking you. I'm just asking, it's something I'm mulling over.
Yeah.
Why does it start imperfect?
Yeah. That's a very good question. So I said it the way I did because I know that's how many of us think about it. That God created a perfect world, and it's only after Adam and Eve that there are any problems or challenges. But what the text says is that God creates a good world.
Yeah.
It's good. And good means it's conducive for human thriving and for communities and for us to be fruitful and multiply. But God says that we are to rule and subdue the earth. Even that subdue the earth means there's something out there that we need to subdue. Maybe serpents who come to whisper in your ears. Instead of submitting to them, you're supposed to rule over them. But that's not what we did. Now, so sin, I think, enters the world, that's what the Bible tells us, through Adam and Eve. So we start with non-order. Non-order it's benign. There's nothing malicious about it. There are challenges, but it's kind of like tectonic plates. They're not evil. It's just a part of the design of the world. Earthquakes are a part of the design of the world. All right? But sin is a different thing. I'm going to kill that boy there. No, that is not benign. That's not non-order. That's disorder. That is malignant. That stuff there is degenerative. It rots. It gets worse. You know how this goes, right? Yeah. You have a thing that you're dealing with that is sin. Like today you say Renex and you say, I don't like him. And you don't go and say, why I don't like Renex? I need to do this thing, Renex, and because me, pay attention a long time, that's why I don't like you. Renex knows this is not true. You keep it in your heart. Next week, Mr. Renex, me really not like him. This is how our sin works, isn't it? So we're dealing with two different things here. God didn't create sin. We did that. So we've now introduced another level into God's good world. So the question is, why did God not just sort it all out? That's a great question, and I've been pondering it. And I've been pondering it because when I talk about these things to my wife, she's the one who brings me down to earth. She said, but why God did that? I said, no, I want to tell you about it. She said, but why God did that? But why God? Give me a break. I'm trying to tell you about this. And here's what I've been thinking. I don't have a complete answer. My son Chase, when he was 7 years old, I went to Africa and I got this wooden animal thing that you put together as a model. And the idea was, we're going to build this together as father and son. Kid's 7 years old. So we're trying to put the thing together, and I don't really like putting things together. That's not my thing. And the little boys, put this here, daddy, put this here, and he's going to break it. I'm like, no, put it down. And I almost felt like, no, man, go to your room, let me just do it. But then it occurred to me, the whole point is about our doing it together. I can do it, but I want to do it with him because he's my son. I want a relationship with him. I want this. It's going to be a lot more meaningful if we do it together. And that's what God is doing with us, why he wants to rule the earth with us. He wants to co-partner with us. We can sort it out, you know. But he's trying to make us into something. So we're on a journey. There's a scholar by the name of N.T. Wright. He says that God is a through people working God. That means that God is the kind of God that does things through people. That's what incarnation is about. Why does Jesus come as a human being? Because God is intent on rehabilitating the human project. He's not going to do it any other way than with us. And that means if we have problems in this world, we have to be a part of the solution. God not dropping it from the sky. You have things you don't like about the church? Nobody going to come in from foreign to fix it. God wants to use you. And if you're not available, it ain't going to get done. Those have been my musings so far, but I'm still thinking about it. Great question. Great question. Yes, who was next? Yes, Licio.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
But I'm thinking, can something be good but still be perfect? Because I'm thinking,
Yes.
I can eat something, I'm like, whoa, that was good, and it was done perfectly.
Yes.
That doesn't mean that because it's good, it's not perfect.
That's true.
So I'm just saying, is that we're reading into the text, that because he said good, we're saying it's not perfect. And there are other scriptures that support the fact that God did not create a perfect world.
Right. So, I think that word perfect can make us feel like, boy, so God not perfect. God is perfect. I think what I'm trying to say is this. He left the sea. He left the darkness. He left the desert. Those are symbols of chaos. And those are left there to tell us that the world that we exist in still has an element of chaos in it. He has not eradicated it. So maybe if that word perfect is like, no, don't tell me that God didn't. Maybe you don't like the word perfect. But what I am saying from Genesis 1, what is very clear in Genesis 1, or from Genesis 1 through the rest of the biblical story, is that God creates light and it contains the darkness. It doesn't eradicate it. God creates the land and separates it from the sea, but the sea is definitely still there. And we're going to see that the sea, that's an image of chaos. Darkness is an image of chaos. And the desert is the same thing. We see it back in Eden and in Jeremiah 4, where it says, look, God said, all right, judgment will come. What's the judgment? I take my hand off the wheel. Desert is coming back to you. So I think that's what I mean when I say that it's a good world. You're right, something can't be good and perfect. But what I'm saying is God creates a good world, but there are elements that remain still to be subdued and controlled. Does that help? Yeah. And think about it some more. I realize that I've been living with these things for a while. That's why the Bible says that we are to meditate on the Word of God. You literally have to spend a lot of time just thinking about it and reflecting on it and letting it germinate and so on. All right, we'll take a couple more. I see your hand, Louis. I see Carol. I see Marlene. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's it. Yes.
So the idea you're talking about, is that akin to why is it tree in the middle of the garden?
Yes. Right. So that's Genesis 2. And I think that what we have in the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is a choice. It's a choice that we have, whether we are going to depend on God and fear him and obey him to know how to rule and subdue the earth, or whether we are going to rely on our own knowledge. So I don't think that tree is a chaos tree. I think that tree is a tree of choice. But that choice is what lets in the sin through the chaos creature, the serpent whispering into Eve and Adam's ear. Because, by the way, he was there the whole time. And we only find out at the end that he was there. So it's almost like the writer is saying, "Him a go on like him never did it." He was there. Yeah. Good question. Thanks for that, Louis. Who did I say was next? Yes, go ahead, please, Carol.
Okay, so I am trying, when we read the Bible, we try to
Yes.
logically think through.
Mm-hmm.
And so day one, light and darkness.
Yeah.
And then day four,
Mm-hmm.
sun, moon, and star. But logically,
Mhm.
I'm thinking, what's the light is governed by the sun,
Mm-hmm.
moon, and star.
Yes.
So, so in my mind, I'm thinking, so
Yeah.
what is the
Yep.
text saying here in terms of day one light?
Yeah. Yeah. So where the light coming from if the sun don't exist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Very good question.
so
And
I'm wondering, is that just how they structure their
Yeah.
writing in terms of the whole parallelism?
Yeah.
If it's parallelism,
Yeah.
then what sense is that trying to do?
right. So I think our problem there is we're doing science, and this is theology. And I think we're going to look at that when we get to days 1 through 3. But the short answer is God is a light. The sun, moon, and stars are just reflections of God, who is the source of light. We get to the end of Revelation, there's no temple, there's no sun, because God is a light, and there is no night. So, yeah, great question. I think we'll delve into that a little bit more closely when we get to day one. Who's next? Yes, go ahead, Marlene.
Courtney, I was just reflecting on this partnership that
Yes.
we are
Yes.
in the recreation.
Yes.
And I think it's an awesome responsibility
Mhm.
that for myself, I don't think that I have to embrace.
Mhm.
My thinking is more along the lines of, why God just deal with all of this if we don't see what is happening.
Why God no comfy world? Yeah.
And I kind of thinking like Sandy
Yeah.
is
Beam me up, Lord.
we just want to be with the Lord.
Yeah.
But I realize that it places a responsibility on
Mhm.
us. And we think more about what can God do for us
Yeah.
in our daily lives. We pray about our immediate situation, our immediate struggles.
Yeah.
And even though we know that we are disciples and we should be evangelizing and we should be the light of the world and so on, I don't think, well, for me, I don't think that I fully have embraced that
Mhm.
partnership.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you're going to speak more on
Yes.
how we go about
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it just struck me
Yeah.
that it does place an awesome responsibility on us as Christians.
Yeah. Thank you for that reflection, Marlene. And Marlene essentially says for our online viewers that the idea of our partnering with God in creation, in bringing order out of chaos, struck her because the way she tends to think is, God, come for your world, and is an awesome responsibility. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when we get down to the image of God on day 6. And that's what my sermon tomorrow is on. It is on what it means for us to be the image of God. And I think it's very different than what we think. And a part of why we're doing Genesis 1 is I'm trying to help us to think biblically. Because a lot of our thinking is, God going to come from more and I'm burn it up and done with it. And all the wicked people, them, fire! And as for us, we're going to be up there in the cloud with God. And it's going to be, on whatever. But that's not the biblical picture. The biblical picture is from now God wants us to work with him. And at some point, he's going to give us a recreated earth. So the earth is not just going to burn up on Dashway. It's going to be renewed. And we are going to dwell with him on heaven and on earth. And we are going to be reigning with him forever. We're going to be doing the kind of work that Adam should have been doing with Eve at the beginning. We're going to enjoy the creativity that God has given us to make a world that is increasingly reflective of the glory of God. That's a wholly different picture than we tend to have without understanding what's going on in Genesis 1. And so I'm trying to help us to process that to get to that place. Thank you for that comment. Who was next? Was it you, Althea? No? I'm sorry. I think it's 1, 2. I got to move on, so maybe we can take it at the next time with the Q&A. Yes. Who was next? I can't remember. It was you, Antoinette, you got, and then after that, was your hand up before Ozzy? Yes, so after Antoinette, then you, Ozzy. Go ahead, Antoinette.
I was thinking as these ladies were sharing,
Yes.
that I guess we are, especially we need to remember where I am at. I am thinking that God's plan is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I may not see it as perfect,
Mm-hmm.
because, as you said, you know, the chaos, he left the chaos there. But the plan is perfect.
Mm-hmm.
The whole planet is perfect. We may not know why God did
Yeah.
it, but the plan
Yes.
is perfect.
That's right.
We stepped in and messed it up, and
Yeah.
then he's trying to, regardless, he's loving us enough not to start over.
Yeah.
'Cause I always think the easiest thing was to do was, all right, forget Adam and Eve, and let's start over, and that would have been even a better plan. But then, if I was Adam and Eve, I would have won
Yeah.
a second and third and a million chances.
Yeah.
But I need to remember that even if I can't see the plan, that is perfect.
Yeah. Thank you, Antoinette. We do have to trust God. There's a lot we don't understand, but he's wise. If God were to start over without Adam and Eve, that means he wouldn't start with any of us, because we are Adam and Eve. We're in them. They're representative of us. You read that story with any honesty, you know that's you. If I was in the garden, I'd do the exact same thing. Don't to make my wife go on and take it. And that's how I do go on and make me see. And then she blow it. See me to tell you. It's us. And this is why I believe the Bible is so true, because it speaks so much to our condition. No man could write that. Were you next? Yeah. Go ahead. Did you have your hand up before?
Yeah, but I'm not sure if
Okay, so we're after you, when we take you, and then we're going to move on for time.
So
Great.
when Lycia talks about
Yes.
is it perfect or
Yes.
but God says it is good.
Yes.
creation. Anthony was talking about the plan.
Yes.
I guess it's not-
That's
it's
true.
not salvation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no, the creation, the whole
Creation plan.
Yeah.
So good and perfect.
Yeah.
And you mentioned in Genesis, Revelation,
Yeah.
when there's no more sun with God,
Yeah.
will be the light.
Yeah.
So he said, why not just start with that
Yes.
perfect
Yeah.
plan from Revelation
Yeah.
instead of going through all this?
Or perfect world.
Yeah.
You know.
You know, so,
Why not?
You know, we have the good plan.
Yeah.
I was showing that. Okay, I was studying Bible and I was saying, you know, because of our sin, we mess up, so we couldn't get God's best plan. So we have the next best because sin creates. I'm probably looking at that from wasn't such a good analogy.
Well, I think the truth is that God's best was Eden. And we did blow it. And so God come again. And he said, all right, let me start over with Noah. And right after him come off the boat, problem again. And the Abraham, him blow it. And God said, all right, you know. But what that tells us is that God is persistent. He does not give up on us. He doesn't give up on us as a church, and he does not give up on us as individuals. And so God is perfect in that respect. But the world that we live in, the point I'm making is, there is work to do, and God wants to work with us. And he's going to resolve the unresolved parts of it that are chaotic in the end. But till then, I think Anthony's point is, we don't understand all the why God did it. I gave Kean a little answer. Maybe it never washed too well with Anthony. But I'm not saying my answer is the answer, but she's right. We have to trust God. When we get there, we can ask him, or maybe he'll reveal it to us. I got to move on, so I'll take Denise, and then I'll move on. And we'll have more Q&A afterwards, so we'll have more chance to interact like this. Yes, go ahead,
okay,
Denise.
I think
personally that God's creation is perfect.
Yes.
I think Him leaving the chaos
Mm-hmm.
with the creation is to keep us in check.
Okay.
Because
Mm-hmm.
that's what you spoke about, the earthquake and
Yeah.
stuff. Sometimes we go through life and until we have that moment when someone dies
Yeah.
or when there's an earthquake,
Yeah.
we completely forget about who God is
Yeah.
and His power and why we're here.
Yeah.
And so those moments, those chaotic moments,
Yeah.
is what keeps us in check.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe the plan is perfect because it's right there beside us, and it will keep us in check.
Yeah.
So that's my point.
Great. So, as Antoinette says, the plan is perfect. And you, like Lisa, don't like my word perfect. That's okay. Let's try another word. God's world is good, but it's not without chaos. That's what I mean. There are challenges in the world. There's danger in the world. The world that God created requires our depending on Him in order for us to navigate it. And the chaos can, and sometimes it will break through. One of the things I think that hurts people is if they have a perception that everything is supposed to go well in life. A lot of people struggle with that. Because your theology really messes you up, you know. If you think that everything's supposed to go well and God create, sorry I have to use the word again, a perfect world, meaning, and by that you mean there are no challenges. The moment you have challenges, what that you do, God? It's like me and my cold. No, I mean, there are challenges. That's the point.
Sorry, I don't want to go.
Yes, I gotta move.
Wait, just one thing. So
Yes.
if in the new, at the end of
Yes.
time,
Yes.
God
Yes.
back to the earth. Isn't that what we're going to have?
What's that?
A world without.
Without chaos. Yes, we're gonna get there. We're on a journey. He's taking us there. It's a journey. That's where we're going, but He doesn't start there. Look at the words. He leaves the sea. He leaves the darkness, and He calls it night. There is a desert, and He's using it all through the Bible, and He gets to the end, and He uses these words. That's what I mean by the way the Hebrew text works, is with these repeated patterns and words that connect. We're supposed to connect Genesis 1 and Revelation, and we're supposed to say, there is no sea. That means something. That's not a throwaway phrase. That's supposed to go boom in your mind. It's supposed to say, there is no more chaos. And let me tell you, when we start talking about Leviathan, you got to understand what we're talking about. When we start talking about Jesus being the light of the world and darkness, you got to understand when it says there is no night, that's not a throwaway phrase. And the garden coming back as a city, coming straight out of heaven, nothing else. It's just put up nice and pretty. All of that is telling us something. You have to reflect on it. You guys all right? I know you got more questions. Questions are good. Yeah, we will have more Q&A.
Every time I read the Bible,
Yeah.
I find, because like now we're going through the Bible
Yes.
from Genesis, and I find I have more questions. The deeper I get
Yes.
studying my Bible, I have more questions.
You should. If you don't, there's a problem. If you don't, there's a problem. There is more to learn about God. And the moment you think you figured it out, you don't know a thing. All right, I'm moving on. Days 1 to 3. I'm going to move like gas. So on day 1, God says, let there be light, and there was light. God saw that the light was good. And He separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness He called night. See Him leave it? There was evening and there was morning the first day. Number of things here. I can't get into all of them. God begins to bring order to the world by dealing with darkness, by introducing light. Darkness does not disappear, but light brackets or contains the darkness in the same way that the land will bracket or contain the sea. God starts to bring order to chaos by separating and naming. Notice that God is created by His word, by speaking, by the breath, the ruach of God, which is over the waters. And so if Jesus is God's word, and God's breath, ruach, is God's spirit, then Father, Son, and Spirit are at work in creation.
That's right.
I don't know, Keon, whether the biblical writer understood that when he wrote it, but I can follow that thread to get there now. See what I did? See that? Okay. Notice that God first deals with the darkness by creating light and separating from the darkness. and naming the light day and the darkness night. Then he names the light day and the darkness night. I said that already. So God, really, what he's dealing with is he's creating time. Okay? So day one, God creates light and separates from darkness, and he names the light day and the darkness night. And as Carol says, was it Carol? Yes. God doesn't create the sun until day 4. So some people say, how come? There's light on the first day if the sun was not created until the 4th day. That is our problem, and not the problem of the author of Genesis. Our problem is that we are approaching an ancient text with modern cosmology. Okay? We're not doing science here, we're doing theology. So John Walton says, the people of the ancient world did not believe that all light came from the sun. There was no knowledge that the moon simply reflected the light of the sun. We know that, right? Yeah. Moreover, there's no hint in the text that daylight was caused by sunlight. The sun, moon, and stars were all seen as bearers of light, but daylight was present even when the sun was behind a cloud or eclipsed. It made its appearance before the sun rose and remained after the sun set. So you got to enter their world. They're not thinking that light necessarily comes from the sun. The author does not attempt an analysis of the physical properties of light. He's not talking about photons. Nor is he concerned about its source or generation. Light in the text is the regulator of time. And so we're talking about how God is organizing life for mankind to live. So what God is doing is he's creating a period of darkness and a period of light. And he's doing this so that mankind can find light in which his plants can grow, he can do work and raise his kids, and he can have sanity, let's put it that way, because there's a difference between day and night. He knows when to go to bed and when to get up and go to work. That's what God is really creating, and so light is the regulator of time. And so we're told there was evening and there was morning the first day. So here's the next question people ask. If God created the sun on the 4th day, how come 4 days had passed? If you don't have no sun, how are you supposed to have 4 days? Because each day is as a result of the earth going one complete rotation. Is that right? I'm not very good at science. And the year is one complete orbit around the sun. Is that so it go? All right, yeah, great. So, you know the answer to this, right? We are not doing science. Okay? What the text is saying when it says there was evening and there was morning, there's evening first because when God creates light, he creates a period for it. And then when the sun goes down, evening, then we have night. And then the next period of night, when the sun rises, that's morning. So it's tracking the thing from when God creates light. First there's light, that, then you have evening, then you have darkness, then the next time the sun come up, that is morning, and it's telling you that period from when the sun got to evening to morning is a day. That's what it's saying. It's not getting into a day is really when the earth does a complete rotation. That is not what it is saying. So God's not doing science, he's doing theology. This is a highly schematized account of the creation, and the sun is created on day 4 as the inhabitants of the heavens to rule over day and night and to separate day from night. So this is not a sequential scientific account. It's a theology about where order in our world comes from. It's telling us that light comes from God. God is a source of light, including the sun, the moon, and the stars. So here's a text that maybe you didn't know was in your Bible. Isaiah 60. This is a passage in which Isaiah says, speaking of the restoration of Israel and the New Jerusalem, the sun will be no more. The sun will no more be your light by day, nor will the brightness of the moon shine on you. For the Lord will be your everlasting light, and your God will be your glory. Your sun will never set again, and your moon will wane no more. The Lord will be your everlasting light, and your days of sorrow will end. So it's pointing really to what's going to happen in Revelation when there is no more night. And what's going to happen is no more sun nor moon. We don't need that because guess what? God is going to provide the light himself. God is the ultimate source of light. That's what this is saying. So in John 1, John begins in the beginning. What is that supposed to remind you of? I wonder. He's referencing Genesis 1. And he knows the way you read Hebrew text is repeated words means you're supposed to compare the two things. So he's gone back to Genesis and he says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life. And check it out. And that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. God is the true light. Yeah. All them things up in the sky, that's all of them is reminding you that God is the light. Yes. Okay? And then later in John 8:12 and John 9:4-5, Jesus says, I am the light of the world. Go reflect on that. Just take those words and reflect on it. I am the light of the world. So he says, I am the light of the world. I am the end of your chaos. All you talking about no science and sun or shine and this is the sun give light. Me turn off that little light there so you don't have no light in the darkness. I am the light of the world. You want to understand? Come to me. I am the light of the world. I am the source of order when God said, let there be light. I'm me that. Yes. Go reflect on it. And then Revelation 22, this is what I've been referencing. This is at the end where everything perfect. There will be no more night. They will not need the light of a lamp or the light of the sun, for the Lord God will give them light. And they will reign forever and ever. Does that mean a little bit more to you? Go reflect on that too. All right. So the end of the biblical story about darkness and the sun and all kinds of artificial light are done away with. And God is the only source of light. So in Genesis 1, when we talk about light, we're talking about more than the sun. Do you see that? There's more going on by the use of that word. So we're told that God saw the light was good. What does that mean? The Hebrew word is tov. And this adjective has a broad range of meaning like its English equivalent. Primarily, it refers to an object's quality and fitness for purpose, and particularly in the mind and opinion of God as used by the Israelites. So when God says that light is good, he means that it is suitable for mankind to live. It's conducive to our life and the thriving of our human communities. He's making a good creation, a good world for humankind, and all the creatures that he has created to inhabit it. God is a kind and loving, generous, and benevolent God. That's what it tells us. Day 2. God said, let there be a vault between the waters to separate the water from water. So God made the vault and separated the water under the vault from the water above, and it was so. God called the vault sky, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. So God creates the vault, some translations say firmament. The Hebrew word is rakia, and it's like a hard surface that prevents the waters above from coming down on the space that God has created for man to live in, the earth. And then secondly, separates the waters below, that's the next day, into earth and land. So basically, that's the picture in their mind, which is quite similar to the cosmologies around them, that there is this hardened surface that prevents the waters above from coming down. But God does this by his word. He doesn't have to split a dragon in two. And that word, rakia, I've already explained, it means a firmament, or it's like a beaten metal plate that is a hard surface. And there are texts like Job 37:18. That word there, when it talks about spread out, is a verb raka, from which we get the noun rakia. And so the idea is you knock out something to the part that it is hard and flat, and that is what's holding the waters up from coming down. And then in day 3, God said, let the water under the sky be gathered to one place and let dry ground appear. And it was so. God called the dry ground land, and he gathered the waters. The gathered waters he called seas, and God saw it was good. So God gathers the waters below, under the heavens, in one place, which allows the dry land to appear, and he names the dry land earth, and he names the waters seas. So God separates the waters below and the land, and he names them land and sea. What God is doing is bringing the waters under control. And this corresponds to the ordering of the primordial waters in the other creation stories from Israel's neighbors. Like remember the Enuma Elish, where Marduk had to take on Tiamat and split her in two and all this kind of stuff going on. But notice with God, these waters are not a God. They're nothing, okay? They're non-order. And what God does is, by his word, him not in no fight nor no cascas. Him say, let there be, and him deal with it. Now think of the way in which the Babylonians are thinking, well, our God split Marduk and put this and that. And the Israelites says, well, our God said, let there be land and let the waters separate, and it did. Oh, you think that Tiamat is a God? Tiamat is not no God. Tiamat is just some water that God just say, split. It's a completely different way of thinking that's going to blow their minds. This God that you have is way above any God that we could imagine. So we have all these passages where God controls the waters, like Proverbs 8, 27 to 29. And all these show how powerful God is, right? Just read it with ancient Near Eastern mindset in the back of your head. This is wisdom saying, I was there when God set the heavens in place. When he marked out the horizon on the face of the deep, the tehom, that's the darkness was on the face of the deep. When he established the clouds above and securely the foundations of the deep. Check this out. When he gave the sea its boundary, so that the waters would not overstep his command, and when he marked out the foundations of the earth, God says, stop right just up. And it stops. In Job 38, God questions Job. He says, look, man, you want to ask me some questions? Answer a few for me. Who shut the sea with its doors when it burst out from the womb, when I made the clouds its garment and thick darkness its swaddling band, and prescribed limits for it, and set bars and doors, and said, thus far shall you come and no farther, and here shall your proud waves be stayed. Think of this in the context of them thinking of Tiamat, that all the gods freed off. And Marduk got to get in this big battle weight and all this kind of stuff, and God just said, stop right here. Or Psalm 104. Praise the Lord, O my soul. Lord my God, you're very great. You're clothed with splendor and majesty. The Lord wraps himself in light as with a garment. He stretches out the heavens like a tent and lays the beams of his upper chambers on their waters. He makes the clouds his chariot and rides on the wings of the wind. He makes wind his messengers, flames of fire, his servants. He said the earth and its foundations, it can never be moved. You cover with the watery depths of Tehom as with a garment. The waters, Mayim, stood above the mountains. But at your rebuke, the waters fled. At the sound of your thunder, they took to flight. Now, what is he doing? He's taking the Genesis 1 creation account, and what is he blending that with right here? Let me keep reading. They flowed over the mountains. They went down into the valleys to the place you assigned them. You set a boundary they cannot cross. Never again will they cover the earth. He's talking about the flood. So that's another, the flood is like Genesis 1. Saying God is in control of the waters. He can, stop your soul, release and wash them away. God is a God that is above the nations, gods. And he makes springs pour water into the ravines. It flows between the mountains. They give water to all the beasts of the field. The wild donkeys quench your thirst. The birds of the sky nest by the waters. They sing among the branches. He waters the mountains from his upper chambers. The land is satisfied by the fruit of his work. So what he's done here, he's tamed the water. So, too much or too little water is a problem. You see that, right? Yes. So what God does is, he contains the waters by the land, and then he regulates so that we and the creatures, like even the little bird, them, get enough water. So the water is coming up by springs, and God is the one who's watering us from his upper chambers. He's letting just the right amount of rain fall so that we all live. This is a picture of a God who's kind and benevolent and completely in control. But we can't really understand these things unless we understand the context in which these texts are written. You guys with me? Yeah. I'm driving to the end here. Well, you know what happens. So we blow it, and what God does is all the springs of the great deep. So first I'm coming up trickle, so we can get enough water. God said, you know, turn on the pipe. God says, you know, he says, let it go, let it flow. Bucket, you know, remove the things that are stopping it from just overwhelming us. So now too much water. And the floodgates of the heavens, so up there, so, you know, it just opened it. And what is happening is God drops his hands, and what we have is an implosion. We have chaos returns. We're back to day one of Genesis. But God remembers Noah, and God makes a wind blow over the earth. We talked about that, the water subside. And then what does he do? The fountains of the deep and the windows of the heaven plug the hole below and lock above. So now we have order again. In the first series, we went through this chart. I won't go through it again. It shows that creation in Genesis 1 mirrors the recreation that God does in Genesis 8 to 9 with the flood. In the end, we're told that God said the land produced vegetation, seed-bearing plants, and trees on the land that bear fruit with seed in it according to their various kinds. It was so. The land produced vegetation, plants bearing seed according to their kinds, and trees, bearing fruit with seed in it according to their kinds. God saw it was good, and there was evening and there was morning, the third day. So not only does God create land on the third day, he also makes the land fertile and produces plants, seed, and fruit trees. Why does God create plants, seed, and fruit trees on the land? Why is it there? For people. Why? To look at? To eat. Now, you remember the Enuma Elish? Why were people created? To serve the gods. To feed them. So the gods of the people around, they said, let's make some people to feed us. In fact, they have a flood story, the Gilgamesh epic, where after the gods wipe out the people, they don't get no sacrifices. And so one guy survived, and he give a little sacrifice, and the gods are like, the text literally says, they're like flies swarming the food. Because they're like, we're hungry, we can't get no food, the people are not doing nothing. But the God of Genesis 1 don't need us to feed him. He's a God who cares about us to feed us. Psalm 104 says he makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for people to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth. Wine that gladdens human hearts. Listen to that. Oil to make their faces shine, and bread that sustains their hearts. See the foodie Sandy Swede over there saying, yeah, man. Yeah, God wants us to enjoy our food. It's who he is. All creatures look to you to give them their food at the proper time. When you give it to them, they gather it up. When you open your hand, they're satisfied with good things. Now, this God is very different than the God of Enuma Elish. You see that? This is the kind of God. Read Psalm 104. If you know the Lord is keeping you, what are you worried about? If you know the Lord is keeping you, why don't you sing and shout? You know what that song is about? We worry because we don't know who God is.
That is true. That is true.
Jesus in Matthew 6, when he's trying to tell us, don't be anxious about tomorrow. He said, God, feed the birds. I think he's got in the back of his head Psalm 104.
Yeah.
He said, God, give water to the bird. Even the grass, God give water to grow and take care of the cattle. He's a good God. He's a benevolent God. He's going to take care of you. Our dealing with worry and fear and anxiety, and let me tell you, I got a lot of work to do with that. Our dealing with that it boils down to our taking the time to know this God that Genesis 1 is trying to tell us. God is trying to show us, I'm this guy. I'm not Marduk. I don't need anything from you. I want to love you. I don't just want to give you food to eat. I want you to enjoy it. So when the chicken that tastes nice, I need that. I want you not just to eat it. I want to bring you joy. I want you, when you drink a little wine, it make your heart merry. Don't drink too much. Paul said, drink a little wine. A little. But God wants us to enjoy his good creation because he's a good God. All right. I got 7 minutes before I'm going to let you go. So I'm going to take 15 minutes from your lunchtime if you'll allow me to make up back. But that means we have to leave here in the next 7 minutes. There are a couple of people who had their hands up before. Althea was one. Who was the other person? Was there somebody else? Julius has his hand up now, so he could go. And then if we have, I see Patricia's hand. So let's take those three. I see Joseph as well. But it doesn't have to be brief enough because I want the people to go for lunch so that God can give them the food to make them happy. And so don't stand in the way of God. It may move you. Be brief. Yes, Althea.
Yeah, I think perhaps it's our culture.
I'm listening.
Or, I don't know if it's this part of the world that may have a problem with enough.
Yeah.
And so sometimes I think a lot of our anxieties and stress is because we're aiming for more or perfection.
Yeah.
And I really love the fact that God keeps saying this is good, but
Yeah.
we should think of what he made. It's beyond good.
Mm-hmm.
It's way, way, way beyond good. But he said it's good, and I think sometimes we do our best, and when it's good, it's good. And you did say that God meets us where we are. And so therefore, I think we can relieve ourselves of some of the anxieties and stress when we have enough and not more, and we do our best and it's good. And trust that God will meet us there.
Right. So you're saying a lot of it has to do with our perception of good. And certainly the world that God created is good for us. It's what we need. And perhaps if we stayed within the bounds that God gave us, then we would be okay. A part of our problem is that we go outside the bounds, whether with sin or building on Gully Bank. And you say, well, people build on Gully Bank because they're poor. Well, we have poor because of sin, but poverty because of poverty is evil. And we wouldn't have poverty if people were sharing. There's enough for all of us, is the point. So it's not, the problem is not God's. When I say it's good, I don't mean that it's, when I say it's good but with chaos, I don't mean that it's bad. But we have to get to a place where we appreciate what God has given us. Who was next? I can only take the hands that were up before. Who was it? Julius, you were next? Yes.
Yeah, and this is good stuff. You know what? The concept of chaos and order,
Yeah.
as you spoke, and you talked about God dropping his hands,
Yeah.
I thought about Romans 1, specifically
Yes.
verses 24.
God hands him over.
He gave them
Yeah.
over.
Yeah.
And so,
And what is described there is chaos, isn't it?
yes. And so if you persist in doing
Yeah.
or making choices
Yeah.
that are wrong,
Yeah.
that are ungodly, he will drop his hands and chaos will flood like a tsunami back into your life.
Yeah.
And it's only when you come back to Christ does order come back into your life. Because if I leave God, I'm messed up. My marriage is done. My kids are messed up. You know, so it's that whole thing of if I persist
Yeah.
in this, God will give me over. He'll drop his hands. And so
Yeah.
I need to be careful of the choices that I make. And I make good choices if I stay close to God. So it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, it's connecting.
Yeah. Well said, Julius. And reflect on Judges and the cycle of the Judges. And that's what's happening. God creates order. And what do? They fall out for a while, and after that, every man go do his own thing. Chaos again, and then come back. Sometimes that's what our Christian lives look like. And the problem is that what we need to realize is we've got to stay with God and not keep leaving him. Who is next? Patricia? Yes, and then Joseph, please.
What I want to say is about the creation.
Yeah.
I think God created a
Okay.
There's a reason why it took after the sin,
Yeah.
after Adam and Eve, and then it took away the Garden of Eden from us
Yes.
because of the sin of mankind.
Yes.
And I think the promises is like this Jesus, sending Jesus, knowing that he can make this world perfect for us.
Okay.
And just even in Revelation, as what is his name again?
Ozzy.
Ozzy, right, was talking. I believe that God is going to make us, give us the real perfection
Yes.
of Eden.
Yes.
Because there was food, there are different fruit tree that was there for
Yes.
us to choose from. And then if we have choose what God has given us to, we wouldn't be able to come into this world as imperfection.
Right. So if we did not eat from if we were at the tree of life, then there would not be death. That's what the passage says. And so God did intend in Eden to give us the world that He's taken us to in Revelation. And it is our sin that prevented us from enjoying that. I agree. Okay. All right. Joseph? Yes. We're going to close out here.
It's a question that always asks, and
Yeah.
it kind of puzzles me. After the flood, with Noah and the ark,
Yeah.
they ask, how come we have so many people after Noah and the ark?
Yes.
I mean, you know that God created, and God can create more people, but
Yeah. Right. So what we're told in Genesis is that all the nations came from Noah's 3 sons. And from them, scattered across the world, all the nations that we have. That's the account in the Bible. What that means, we can debate, but let's get to not the next series, the series after that, to really grapple with those questions. But a part of it, I think, is how we think about the text. And we've got to come at it not with our modern 21st century Western minds. We've got to enter their world, hear what God is saying to them, and from there, understand how that applies to us. Okay. So we're going to take lunch now. I appreciate all your patience, and particularly the online audience. So we're going to go from now to, we're going to try and come back at 2 p.m. Okay? And then there are a couple places around here. I think there's Juicy Beef, there's Kentucky Fried Chicken, there's Burger King. I don't know what else there may be. There are also some places that serve the students food, like Mary Seacole Hall. School is open, so those places may be open today on a Saturday. Or if you want to go down to Ligani, fine. But let's try and come back for 2 o'clock so that we can spend the rest of the 2.5 hours that we will have together. You have been a great audience, don't worry. All things will be made clear when we get to heaven and we are with God. We are dismissed.